Say that call sign again. The voice over the radio was tight, controlled, but something inside it had already cracked. 12 minutes earlier, no one on Flight 728 even knew anything was wrong. The cabin lights were dim, soft hum of engines steady at 30,000 feet, passengers half asleep, half lost in their screens. In seat 14A, Evelyn Carter sat still, hands folded loosely in her lap, eyes not on a movie, not on her phone, just listening. Most people wouldn't notice the difference, but something in the engine pitch had shifted. Subtle, uneven, like a heartbeat skipping once every few seconds. A flight attendant passed by, offering drinks with a practiced smile. Evelyn declined with a small shake of her head, gaze drifting toward the front of the aircraft. Her breathing stayed slow, measured, almost too calm for someone on a routine commercial flight. Across the aisle, a man laughed at a video, loud enough to draw a few glances. Somewhere behind her, a baby cried, then settled. Everything looked normal. Everything sounded normal. Except it wasn't. Evelyn's fingers tightened slightly against her sleeve as another faint vibration passed through the floor beneath her feet. Not turbulence. Not weather. Something deeper. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, just long enough to confirm what her instincts were already telling her. When she opened them again, the calm in her expression hadn't changed, but the stillness around her felt different, heavier somehow. Then it happened. The intercom clicked on, but instead of the captain's steady voice, there was only a burst of static. A second later, the plane dipped, just enough to make a few passengers gasp, just enough to send a ripple of unease through the cabin. A flight attendant hurried forward, her pace no longer casual. Another followed, whispering something urgent. The cockpit door stayed closed. Too long. Evelyn stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to draw a glance from the man beside her. "Ma'am, you need to remain seated," a flight attendant called out, voice polite but strained. Evelyn didn't argue, didn't raise her voice. She just looked at her, really looked, and something in that quiet, steady gaze made the attendant hesitate for half a second longer than she should have. Another drop, sharper this time. Overhead bins rattled softly. A few people started asking questions. No one was getting answers. Evelyn stepped into the aisle. "Open the cockpit," she said, her tone low, controlled, not a request. The attendant blinked, caught between protocol and something she couldn't quite name. "Ma'am, Evelyn leaned in slightly, just enough for only her to hear. "You're out of time." No panic, no urgency in her voice. Just certainty. Up front, a muffled thud echoed from behind the cockpit door. That was all it took. The attendant's face drained of color. For a moment, the entire cabin held its breath without realizing it. And Evelyn Carter, the quiet passenger no one had noticed, took one step closer to the door like she had done this before. Like she had never stopped. The cockpit door opened just enough to let tension spill into the cabin. One of the flight attendants stepped back, her hands trembling as she glanced inside. "He is not responding," she whispered, barely audible over the rising murmur behind her. Evelyn did not hesitate. She moved forward, slipping through the narrow opening before anyone could stop her. Inside, the air felt different. Tighter, filled with warning tones and flashing indicators that painted the panels in urgent colors. The captain slumped in his seat, headset slightly askew, breathing but unresponsive. The co-pilot was struggling, one hand gripping the controls, the other reaching for switches faster than he could think. His eyes flicked toward Evelyn, confusion and frustration colliding. "You cannot be in here," he said, voice strained. The aircraft dipped again, sharper this time, the horizon tilting just enough to remind everyone how little control remained. Evelyn did not argue. She did not explain. Her eyes scanned the instrument panel in one sweeping motion, taking in altitude, heading, engine output, system warnings. Every detail registered instantly. Autopilot disengaged. She said quietly, more to herself than to him. The co-pilot frowned. "I know that. I am trying to stabilize." "You are overcorrecting," she interrupted, still calm, still steady. No edge in her voice. Just certainty. He hesitated, just for a second. That was all she needed. Evelyn stepped closer, her hand hovering near the control yoke before settling with precision. Not forceful, not hesitant, like placing a piece exactly where it belonged. The aircraft steadied slightly. Not perfect, but better. The difference was immediate enough that the co-pilot noticed. His breathing slowed, just a fraction. "Who are you?" he asked, quieter now. Evelyn did not answer. Her focus remained forward, eyes locked on the artificial horizon. Another alarm chimed. She reached across, flipping a switch without looking, silencing one warning while prioritizing another. "Trim adjustment is off," she said. "You are fighting the aircraft instead of working with it." He stared at her hands. The movements were not guesswork. They were practiced. Automatic. Something learned long before this moment. Outside the cockpit, the cabin noise had shifted. Less panic. More confusion. The plane was no longer dropping in uneven jolts. It was stabilizing. Not fully, but enough to change the air inside. Evelyn leaned slightly toward the radio panel. Her fingers hovered over the transmit button. For a brief moment, she paused. Not out of uncertainty. Out of choice. Then she pressed it. "Control, this is Flight 728 requesting immediate assistance." The co-pilot started, trying to regain command of the situation. Evelyn's hand gently stopped him. Not forcefully. Just enough. She keyed the mic herself. Her voice changed. Still calm, but now carrying something deeper. Something that did not belong to a civilian passenger. "Control," she said, precise and clear. "This is Ghost Raven requesting priority vector and escort." Silence followed. Not static. Not interference. Real silence. On the other end of the line, somewhere far below, something had just shifted. For 3 full seconds, no one answered. The radio stayed open, a silent line stretching from 30,000 feet down to a control room where trained professionals suddenly had no script to follow. The co-pilot turned slowly toward Evelyn, his expression no longer confused, no longer defensive. It was something else now, something closer to disbelief. "What did you just say?" he asked under his breath. Evelyn did not look at him. Her attention remained locked on the horizon line, her hands making small, precise corrections as the aircraft leveled into a more stable glide. "Maintain altitude at 30,000, she said quietly. "Reduce vertical oscillation. Let the aircraft settle." Her tone left no room for argument, yet it never rose above calm. The co-pilot followed her instruction without realizing he had already accepted her authority. Down below, inside a secured air defense coordination center, a controller leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the transmission that had just come through. The call sign echoed in his headset again, replayed automatically by a system designed to flag anomalies. "Ghost Raven." He exchanged a quick glance with the officer beside him. "That designation is not in civilian registry," the officer said, voice low. Fingers moved quickly across a keyboard, pulling up restricted channels that had not been accessed in years. "Cross-check military archives," the controller replied. His pulse had picked up, though his voice stayed controlled. Back in the cockpit, another alert flashed across the panel. Evelyn reached forward, adjusting thrust with a subtle movement, easing the engines into a more balanced output. The vibration underfoot smoothed out further. It was not perfect, but it was controlled. Controlled meant survivable. "You have done this before," the co-pilot said, not a question this time. Evelyn exhaled slowly. For a moment, something flickered behind her eyes. Not pride, not fear. Memory. "Long time ago," she answered, almost too quiet to hear. The radio cracked suddenly, breaking the tension. "Unidentified aircraft declaring Ghost Raven. Confirm call sign." The voice came through, sharper now, no longer routine. Evelyn did not hesitate. "Confirmed," she replied. No extra words. No explanation. Just that. Another pause followed, shorter this time, but heavier. Then a second voice joined the channel, deeper, carrying authority that reached even through static. "Ghost Raven, this is Colonel Marcus. Hail, United States Air Force. State your status." The co-pilot's eyes widened. He knew that voice. Everyone in aviation circles knew that name. Evelyn's grip on the controls did not change, but something in her posture shifted, almost imperceptible. "Aircraft stabilized," she said. "Primary pilot unresponsive. Co-pilot functional. Requesting escort and vector for immediate landing." Silence again, but this time it was different. Not confusion. Recognition. Far above the clouds, 2 F-22 fighters adjusted their course mid-patrol, engines roaring as they accelerated toward a civilian jet that had just spoken a name no one expected to hear again. Inside the lead fighter, The pilot tightened his grip on the stick, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with speed or altitude. "Control, say that call sign again," he said, his voice no longer steady. Down in the control room, the answer came quietly. "Ghost Raven." The pilot inhaled sharply, a memory hitting him harder than any maneuver ever could. Back in the cockpit of the airliner, Evelyn Carter kept her eyes forward, hands steady, as if none of it mattered. As if the past had not just reached up from the silence to find her again. The sky outside remained calm, endless blue stretching in every direction, but inside the cockpit the atmosphere had shifted into something charged, something electric. The co-pilot barely noticed his own breathing anymore. His focus kept drifting back to Evelyn, to the way her hands moved with quiet certainty, to the way every adjustment seemed to come seconds before the aircraft actually needed it. "Colonel Hale is on your frequency," he said, almost to himself, as if saying it out loud might make it less unreal. Evelyn did not react. She simply nodded once, eyes still forward. "Maintain heading," she said softly. "We are going to get one clean descent. No sudden corrections." Her voice carried a rhythm now, not rushed, not forced. It steadied the space around her. The radio came alive again, stronger this time. "Ghost Raven, this is Colonel Hale. Be advised, 2 F-22 aircraft are inbound to your position. They will establish visual contact in approximately 90 seconds. There was a pause. Then his tone shifted, lower, more personal. "Confirm you are able to maintain control until escort arrives." Evelyn let out a slow breath, almost silent. "Affirmative," she replied. "Aircraft is stable. We will hold." Outside, far beyond the range of the passenger's sight, two sharp silhouettes cut through the upper atmosphere, closing the distance with precise intent. Inside the lead fighter, the pilot's jaw tightened as the civilian aircraft came into view. A commercial jet. Ordinary. Except it was not. "Visual confirmed," he said into his headset, but his voice carried something else now. Recognition was creeping in, unwelcome and undeniable. "Say the call sign again," he added, quieter this time. Back in the cockpit, Evelyn heard the request. For the first time since she stepped inside, her fingers paused for half a second above the controls. Not hesitation, memory pressing forward. Then she keyed the radio. "Ghost Raven," she said. Just 2 words. The response on the other end was immediate, but not professional, not detached. It was human. "That is not possible," the fighter pilot whispered, though the transmission still carried through. "We lost that unit years ago." The second jet moved into position on the opposite side of the airliner, forming a silent escort. Both pilots held formation with exact precision, but neither could take their focus off the cockpit window of the aircraft they were protecting. Inside, the co-pilot swallowed hard. "They are adjusting to us," he said, watching the instruments respond to the new proximity. Evelyn gave a small nod. "They are giving us a corridor," she explained. "Follow it exactly." Her hands shifted again, guiding the aircraft into alignment with the invisible path being carved through the sky. Down below, air traffic control cleared surrounding airspace, rerouting flights, opening a direct descent path. Everything was moving now, coordinated, controlled. Because of her. Colonel Hale's voice returned, quieter now, stripped of formal distance. "We have been looking for you," he said. No accusation, no demand, just a statement that carried years behind it. Evelyn's eyes softened for the briefest moment. "You were not supposed to," she answered. Then she adjusted the descent angle by a fraction, bringing the aircraft into a smooth, controlled drop towards safety, as if the past had never caught up to her at all. The aircraft began its descent, slow and controlled, cutting through layers of cloud like a blade guided by invisible hands. Inside the cockpit, the tension had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. It was no longer panic. It was focus, the kind that narrowed the world down to altitude, speed, angle, timing. Evelyn adjusted the throttle slightly, her movements minimal, almost effortless, as if the aircraft itself responded to her before she finished the motion. The co-pilot watched in silence. Every doubt he once had now replaced with something heavier. Respect, yes, but also the realization that he was sitting beside someone who operated on a completely different level. "Descent rate is steady," he said, more as confirmation than instruction. Evelyn gave a small nod. "Keep it that way. Do not chase the numbers." Let them come to you. Her voice stayed low, measured, never rushed. Outside, the two F-22 fighters held perfect formation, one on each side, their presence both protective and symbolic. Inside the lead jet, the pilot could not take his eyes off the cockpit window of the airliner. He had flown countless missions, seen situations that demanded precision and control, but this was different. This was personal. Control, he said quietly. She is flying it like nothing ever happened. Down below, Colonel Hale stood in the operations center, one hand resting against the console, eyes fixed on the radar display. He listened to every word, every pause, every breath that came through the channel. She always did, he replied, almost under his breath. Back in the cockpit, another system alert flickered, softer this time, less urgent. Evelyn reached over and adjusted a setting, silencing it with a single motion. The aircraft responded immediately, stabilizing further as it aligned with the approach corridor cleared miles ahead. You are anticipating everything, the co-pilot said, unable to hold it back any longer. Evelyn's gaze remained forward. No, she answered quietly. I am remembering. For a moment, the weight of those words settled into the space between them. Not explanation, not history, just enough to hint at something far deeper than training. The runway was still miles away, hidden beneath layers of cloud, but the path toward it was already set. Air traffic control continued clearing the airspace, voices now calm, coordinated, almost reverent without realizing why. Everything was moving because she was moving. Colonel Hale's voice came through again, softer now, stripped of rank and command. After this, we need to talk. It was not an order. It was not even a request. It sounded like something unfinished, something that had waited too long. Evelyn did not answer immediately. Her fingers made one final adjustment, guiding the aircraft into a smoother glide as the clouds began to thin below them. Sunlight shifted across the cockpit, casting a pale glow over the instruments, over her hands, over the quiet control she never once tried to explain. There is nothing to talk about, she said at last. Calm, certain, the kind of certainty that came from someone who had already made that decision long ago. Outside, the fighters held position, silent guardians in the sky. Inside, the aircraft continued its descent, steady and sure, carrying hundreds of lives toward the ground under the guidance of someone who had never needed recognition to do what had to be done. Clouds broke beneath them, revealing the runway far below like a thin gray line stretching across the earth. The aircraft continued its descent, smoother now, almost gentle, but every second still mattered. Inside the cockpit, the instruments glowed steady, no longer flashing in urgency, yet still demanding precision. Evelyn adjusted the flaps with a controlled motion, her eyes never leaving the forward view. We are coming in a little fast, the co-pilot said, his voice quieter than before, more careful. Evelyn gave a slight nod. We will bleed speed on final. Do not rush it. Her tone remained even, but there was a weight behind it now, something that carried years of repetition, of moments just like this where there was no room for error. Outside, the two fighters tightened their formation slightly, maintaining perfect alignment as the commercial jet descended through 10,000 feet. The lead pilot exhaled slowly, his grip easing just a fraction as he watched her corrections translate into flawless control. She is still ahead of the aircraft, he murmured, almost in disbelief. Down below, the runway cleared completely. Emergency vehicles stood by at a distance, lights visible but quiet, waiting without interfering. In the operations center, Colonel Hale did not move. His eyes remained fixed on the descending blip, but his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. Back in the cockpit, the co-pilot glanced toward Evelyn again. Gear, he asked. She nodded once. Now. He lowered the landing gear, the mechanical shift echoing through the structure beneath them. The aircraft responded, settling into its approach profile. The runway grew larger, more defined, no longer distant. Passengers in the cabin felt the change, the quiet realization spreading that they were going to make it. No announcements had been made, no explanations given, yet something in the motion of the plane told them everything. Evelyn adjusted the descent angle by a fraction, aligning perfectly with the glide path. Her breathing remained slow, controlled, unaffected by the weight of hundreds of lives resting in each movement. You never lost it, the co-pilot said, almost to himself. Evelyn did not look at him. "You do not lose something like this," she replied softly. "You carry it." The runway threshold approached. Closer. Faster. Every detail sharpened. Wind speed. Angle. Distance. Timing. All of it flowed through her without hesitation. At just the right moment, she eased back on the controls, reducing the descent rate with precision that felt almost invisible. The wheels touched down. Smooth. Controlled. No jolt. No bounce. Just contact. The aircraft rolled forward, decelerating steadily as reverse thrust engaged and the speed bled away. Inside the cabin, silence replaced fear. Not cheers. Not applause. Just quiet, stunned relief. Outside, the two fighters peeled away in perfect synchronization, climbing back into open sky. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. His hands trembled slightly as he looked over at Evelyn. She had already released the controls, already stepped back, like her part in this was finished the moment it no longer required her. The radio crackled one last time. Colonel Hale's voice returned, softer than before. "Welcome back," he said. Evelyn paused at the cockpit door, her hand resting lightly against the frame. For a brief second, her eyes closed. Then she opened the door and walked back into the cabin like she had never been anything more than just another passenger. The cabin felt different now. Not loud, not chaotic, just quiet in a way that only comes after something people cannot fully explain. Passengers sat frozen in their seats, eyes tracking Evelyn as she stepped back into the aisle. No one spoke at first. No one even seemed sure if they should. A flight attendant near the front stared at her, the same one who had hesitated earlier, her expression no longer uncertain, but something closer to awe. "Ma'am," she began, but the word fell short, like it was not enough anymore. Evelyn gave a small nod, nothing more, and continued walking. Her steps were steady, unhurried, as if she had simply gone to check something and returned. The man in seat 14B shifted slightly to let her pass, his earlier confidence gone, replaced by a quiet respect he did not try to hide. She sat down, folded her hands again, and looked forward. Outside, through the small, oval windows, the runway stretched past them as the aircraft slowed to a complete stop. Emergency vehicles remained at a distance, engines idling, their presence no longer urgent, but still watching. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot removed his headset slowly, still processing everything that had just happened. His eyes lingered on the open door, on the empty space where she had stood minutes ago, guiding an aircraft like it was second nature. "Who was she?" he asked quietly, though no one was there to answer. Back in the cabin, the first murmur finally broke the silence. A passenger whispered something to the person beside him. Another leaned forward, trying to get a better look at Evelyn without being obvious. Phones remained in hands, but no one seemed to think about recording. It felt like something that was not meant to be captured, just witnessed. The flight attendant approached again, slower this time, careful with her steps. "Is there anything you need?" she asked, her voice softer, more respectful than before. Evelyn shook her head gently. "Everyone is fine," she replied. Simple, direct, as if that was all that mattered. The cabin door at the front of the aircraft opened, and a group of uniformed personnel stepped in. Their presence was calm but deliberate. Not rushing, not searching, just moving with purpose. One of them paused as his eyes scanned the rows, then locked onto her. For a brief second, he stood still. Then he straightened slightly, his posture shifting in a way that only trained eyes would recognize. Not a salute, not officially, but close enough. The others noticed, their attention following his gaze. No one announced anything. No one called her name. They did not need to. Evelyn remained seated, her expression unchanged, as if none of it belonged to her anymore. Outside, the distant sound of jet engines faded as the fighters climbed back into open sky, their job complete. Inside, the weight of what had happened settled quietly over everyone present. Not as excitement, not as spectacle, but as something deeper, something that would stay with them long after they left the plane. Evelyn adjusted her sleeve slightly, the movement revealing, just for a moment, the edge of a worn chain resting against her wrist. The metal caught the light, then disappeared again as she lowered her hand. She did not look around, did not acknowledge the stares. She simply sat there, calm, composed, as if she had never been anything more than a passenger on a delayed flight. But no one in that cabin would ever see her that way again. The cabin door remained open, but no one rushed to leave. It was as if stepping off the plane too quickly would break something fragile that had settled over the moment. The uniformed personnel moved with quiet coordination, speaking in low voices near the front, their attention still anchored to one row in the middle of the cabin. Evelyn noticed it, of course. She noticed everything. But she did not move. Not yet. One of the officers approached slowly, careful not to draw unnecessary attention, though everyone was already watching. He stopped just short of her seat, his posture straight, controlled. "Ma'am," he said, his voice respectful, but measured, as if choosing each word carefully. "We need to confirm your identity. A simple request. Standard procedure." But nothing about this moment felt standard. Evelyn looked up at him, her expression calm, unreadable. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then she reached into her pocket, not hurried, not reluctant, and pulled out a small, worn item. Not a badge, not a card. A simple chain with a faded tag attached. The metal was scratched, edges softened by time, letters barely visible unless the light hit it just right. She held it in her palm, just enough for him to see. The officer's eyes dropped to it, and in that instant, something shifted. Not shock. Recognition. Deep, immediate recognition. His shoulders straightened even more, and without thinking, he took a small step back. "That is not necessary," he said quietly, almost correcting himself. Around him, the others caught the change. Subtle, but undeniable. No one asked another question. No one needed further proof. Across the aisle, a passenger leaned forward slightly, trying to catch a glimpse, but the moment had already passed. Evelyn closed her hand, the tag disappearing once more, as if it had never been shown. "Everyone is safe," she said, her voice soft, steady, bringing the focus back to what mattered. The officer nodded immediately. "Yes, ma'am." No hesitation this time. No uncertainty. Just acceptance. Behind him, another man spoke into a radio, his tone low but clear. "Confirmed." That single word carried weight, though no one in the cabin understood exactly why. At the front, a medic team moved past them toward the cockpit, checking on the pilot, handling what remained of the situation with professional calm. But even they cast brief glances toward the middle rows, toward the woman, who had already done what needed to be done. Evelyn stood then, not because anyone asked her to, not because she needed permission. She simply rose, adjusting her jacket slightly, her movements as composed as they had been from the beginning. The aisle cleared almost instinctively. People leaned back, giving her space without being told. She stepped forward, passing the officer, who shifted just enough to let her through. No words exchanged. None were needed. At the aircraft door, she paused for a brief second, the outside world waiting just beyond. The noise of the airport filtered in, distant, ordinary, completely unaware of what had just happened inside this plane. Behind her, the cabin remained silent, every pair of eyes following her without a sound. Evelyn did not turn around. She did not look back. She simply stepped out, leaving behind a space that felt heavier the moment she was gone. Inside, the officer remained where he stood, eyes fixed on the empty aisle. One of his colleagues leaned in slightly. "Who was she?" he asked under his breath. The officer exhaled slowly, still processing what he had just seen. "Someone we were never supposed to lose," he replied quietly. And just like that, the door closed, sealing the moment inside the memory of everyone who had witnessed it. Outside, the airport moved like any other day. Ground crews signaled, vehicles passed, distant announcements echoed through the terminal. Nothing in that ordinary rhythm hinted at what had just unfolded above 30,000 feet. Evelyn stepped onto the tarmac with the same steady pace she had carried from the moment she stood in the aisle. No rush, no hesitation, just forward. A transport vehicle waited nearby, engine idling, but she did not head toward it. Instead, she adjusted her jacket slightly and walked along the edge of the marked path, blending into the space between controlled movement and quiet exit. Behind her, the aircraft door remained open for a moment longer. Inside, passengers finally began to move, slowly at first, voices returning in hushed tones. No one spoke loudly. No one laughed. It felt wrong to break the silence too quickly. The co-pilot remained seated in the cockpit, staring out at the runway where everything had come to an end. His hands rested loosely now, no longer shaking, but not fully steady either. He replayed every second in his mind, every correction she made, every word she chose not to say. Ghost Raven, he whispered to himself, the name carrying a weight he did not yet understand. Down below, Colonel Marcus Hale stood just outside a secured operations vehicle, eyes fixed on the figure moving away from the aircraft. He had seen her before. Not like this. Not in person, but in reports. In briefings that never left the room. In stories that ended without closure. One of his officers stepped beside him. "Sir, we can intercept," he said quietly, waiting for the order. Hill did not answer immediately. His gaze followed Evelyn as she reached the edge of the service area, where the structure of the airport began to swallow her into shadow and routine. "No," he said at last. "Simple. Final." The officer hesitated. "Sir." Hill shook his head once, slow, certain. She already made her choice. Across the tarmac, Evelyn paused for a brief second near a service corridor entrance. Not because she was unsure, because she could feel it. The weight of being seen again. The past, reaching, calling her back into something she had left behind. Her hand moved slightly, brushing against the chain at her wrist. The metal was warm now, carrying the echo of everything it represented. For a moment, her fingers lingered there. Then she let it go. No dramatic turn. No final look back. She stepped into the corridor, and just like that, she was gone. Not vanished. Not erased. Just no longer part of the scene. Behind her, the airport continued as if nothing had changed. Planes landed. Planes departed. People moved, unaware of how close everything had come to being different. Inside the aircraft, one passenger finally spoke louder than the rest. Who was she? The question hung in the air, unanswered, but not empty. Because somewhere between the silence, the calm, and the precision they had all witnessed, they already knew the truth did not need to be explained. It was something you felt, something you carried. Out on the runway, Colonel Hale exhaled slowly, his eyes still fixed on the place where she had disappeared. "Respect is earned in silence," he said quietly, not to anyone in particular. Then he turned away, knowing some stories were never meant to be finished, only remembered.